Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar from the Influencer Legal Hub. I'm Catalina Guanta. I'm an associate professor at Utrecht University, and this is our third webinar for the Influencer Legal Hub, where we try to unpack different issues that occur in the influencer economy and try to analyze them from the perspective of European consumer law. The influencer world has really received a lot of attention in recent times, and there is nothing more actual than the discussion that is currently being held around the importance of social media and the potentially harmful but also positive effects of social media on youth, on children, on minors. And in this conversation that we have seen going around the world, we have seen cases such as Meta being sued in various courts in the United States. A lot of European countries also considering social media bans, a social media ban already happening in Australia. What we miss in this discussion and in this debate is not only the dimension of addictive design and what platforms are doing to keep children on these platforms, but also what exactly children are watching. Who are they following? Why are they on social media? Because certainly they are not just staring at a repost button. They're watching content, they are sharing products, they are sharing goods. We have seen that there have been also quite a lot of trends, such as the Sephora Kids trends, that will shed new light on how we should look at children on digital markets, because they are pretty much social media's youngest consumers. So how has this environment changed them, and what is the role of influencers in this discussion about addictive design, about how social media platforms play such an increasingly important role in the lives of children? This is something that we are going to be discussing here today, but before we start with that, allow me to introduce you to Barry Fitzgerald. Barry is a senior legal and policy consultant for the European Commission and the Directorate General for Justice. And he's going to tell you a little bit more about the context of our webinar, namely the Influencer Legal Hub. Barry.
Very much, Lena, for that generous introduction. So I suppose I won't detain you too long because, like everybody else, I'm really eager and interested in getting involved in the meat of today's discussion, which promises to be really, really interesting. I will briefly highlight some of the context, and in particular, a resource called the Influencers Legal Hub. So this particular webinar is being offered within the scope of the Influencers Legal Hub, which is an online receptacle of information and resources, which can be found on the EU Commission website. We'll place a link in the chat shortly. To give you a little bit of the thinking behind that, this was, I suppose, a resource which responded to a need within the influencers community for accessible, understandable, and clear legal knowledge. So unlike a lot of the other legal information on official websites, this is really designed for a non-legal audience. Not to say that it's not useful to legal practitioners too. It contains videos, it contains fact sheets, it contains webinars like today's one, and it also contains, I suppose, crucially, links to other resources for those who, use those specifically designed resources but want to know a little bit more. So that's the context of today's webinar, is within the Influencer Legal Hub. I would encourage you all to, if you haven't already done so, to log on, take a look, and really make good use of those resources which are there. Coming, I suppose, to today's webinar, it's a very, very topical issue that we're looking at. It's one in which there's already a lot of concrete legislation within the EU. Within the EU, there's a lot of concrete legislation, and there's also been a lot of concrete actions taken under that legislation. And there's also a lot of policy initiatives. I won't go into those in detail now because I'm sure some of those will be mentioned within the scope of today's discussion. maybe just to briefly mention a few, I'm sure you're already familiar with the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, the Digital Services Act. These are pieces of legislation which have already provided a framework for concrete action to be taken in I suppose, addressing some of the bad practices that can affect children online in social media, in particular in gaming and in other contexts. So we already have we already have a lot of legislation, we already have a lot of policy in place. All of this work happens under the scope of the EU strategy for the rights of the child, which I suppose balances the child's right to autonomy with the right to protection, which is, I suppose, at the core of children's rights. And more recently, and I suppose this is what makes this discussion all the more timely, is that sure, we have these pieces of legislation which exist already, but there is also a really political realization, that we need to do more. This is a really rapidly evolving context, and so we see, for example, a study which was announced recently by Ursula von der Leyen, which will look at the impacts, the social and political impacts of social media, with a particular emphasis on young people and children. We're also looking at the Digital Fairness Act, we've had a public consultation which has just completed recently, which again will look at, I suppose, online safety, online fairness in the consumer protection field, particularly looking at children as well. So this is really an area where the European Commission, the European Union, national authorities working under the scope of the EU frameworks have been really, really active. We have concrete measures in place, and we're looking to develop further measures. So in that context, conversations like today are really, really useful and really, really timely. And I really, really look forward to today's conversations because of that. One more thing before I finish and leave. I began by encouraging you all to go on and log on to the Influencer Legal Hub. I should say, as a brief piece of promotion, it would probably be of interest to you, given that you're at today's webinar, is that there are currently in development some new resources. And in particular, I'd like to mention 5 video resources that are currently in development for the Influencer Legal Hub. I'll briefly go through the topics that will be covered because they might be of particular interest to you in some instances. We've got one video which will look at the influencer rules, so rules on influencers that are emerging in different European countries. That takes the focus away, I suppose, from the broader EU picture, looking at the national cases a little in more detail. We've got one that specifically looks at advertising and addictive design for minors, which is obviously extremely pertinent in today's context. We've got one that looks at consumer manipulation using AI, again, another timely and topical one in today's context. Then we've got some consumer protection obligations for self-employed influencers. So I know a lot of you today come from the influencer community. So if you're a self-employed influencer, this will be of particular interest to you. And then we've got one that looks at the obligation of advertising stakeholders within the supply chain. So, okay, perhaps the influencer might be liable, but perhaps others in the supply chain and the marketing supply chain might be liable. So that's, again, something which is of interest to many of you here today, I'm sure. I guess you're all informed about this event today, so I'm sure Catalina and our partners in the Influencer Legal Hub will be informing you when those videos become available. So something to watch for the future there. So thank you very much for this opportunity to provide some context. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. I thank all the contributors. They're excellent contributors lined up for today. And I'd like to thank all the participants for their attendance too. And now I'll turn it back over to Catalina.
Thank you so much, Barry. And not only that you can look at the Influencer Legal Hub link just to see what kind of resources we already have there, but also to see this webinar very soon because, as Laura, our colleague, mentioned in the chat, this webinar is being recorded, also to officially inform you, and it is going to be also displayed on the resource list of the Influencer Legal Hub. So you can always revisit it in case you would like to be reminded of some of the debates that will take place here today. So, of course, this webinar is very important because of the wonderful experts we have selected to speak to you today and to discuss this very, very large topic of children on social media. And I would like to start introducing them to you. And first up, we have Lieselot Hudders, who is a full professor at Kent University and a director of the Center for Persuasive Communication. And she currently leads the, if not the largest project in Europe, but also the world, called Kidfluencers, that she is going to tell us about. And it is a project that combines children's consumer behavior and also social media analysis to investigate the effects of kidfluencing on young audiences. Very welcome, Lieselot, here today, and we are very grateful that we can listen to you and learn more about your project. Then we have also Joasha Luzak, who is a full professor of private law at the University of Exeter. She's also one of the leading experts in European consumer law, and she has been dealing with influencers quite extensively, not only from a disclosure perspective, but also from the perspective of sustainability as well. Welcome, Joasha. We very much look forward to hearing your thoughts on these topics. Then we have Otto van der Harst, who is the director of the Stichting Reclamecode. That is the self-regulatory organization in the Netherlands that deals with advertising. He has vast expertise in the advertising industry. And as we have done in other webinars as well, this is not just a webinar where we are interested in what the rules are from the perspective of the regulator and also the European regulator, but we also want to have a balanced discussion and understand what is the industry actually doing. Is the industry providing new ways in which influencers, for instance, can learn how to engage in best practices? And Otto is going to tell us a little bit about that today as well. Welcome, Otto, as well.
Thank you.
Last, but definitely not least, we have Erika Yvonne Jungblood, who is a senior legal advisor at the Norwegian Consumer Authority, and she specializes in marketing practices on social media, and also commercial practices that are aimed at children. And she has worked on a rule that is very interesting and also quite unique because it has been adopted in Norway for the first time quite a few years ago, namely a rule, specifically an advertising rule on a retouched advertising, namely the use of filters on social media and the need to disclose the use of such filters. She's also an active member of the European Consumer Protection Cooperation Network, and she has contributed to several cross-border enforcement cases on influencer marketing. Welcome, Erica, as well. So once more, welcome everyone. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to start with a round of opening statements. I would like to hear your thoughts on the topic at hand. We know that social media and children, especially when it comes to the entire addictive design narrative, has been a very, very highly complex and also sometimes even controversial and contested concept. And when we add the influencer dimension, that gets even more complicated. So let us know some of your initial thoughts. Lieselot, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Catalina. Yeah, I'm currently doing research, participatory and ethnographic research among children aged 3 to 13 years and their families. It's for my Kidfluencer project. So Kidfluencers are monetized social media profiles that are featuring young children under 13 years and publish child-centered content. And the research that we are now doing is studying the role these kidfluencers play in their lives, but also how they use YouTube more broadly. And when I look at their behaviors by observing them and talking to them, we notice that the algorithm plays a huge role. When they go to YouTube and they want to select videos, they just browse on the homepage. They rarely type in what they want to see. They just browse, scan the videos, and then they select what they want to watch. They do not put the video that they are watching on the full screen because they also want to look at the recommendation list to see what video they want to watch next. So you see that they are also using the algorithms recommendations to see what they want to watch. And we notice two patterns in children's viewings behavior. On the one hand, there are children who are really watching just what YouTube suggests them, so what the algorithm pushes to them. It's not linked to their daily life. On the other hand, there are children who are really selecting videos that relate to their offline life, their hobbies, skating videos, for instance, or crafting, and they get inspired by those videos. They also watch gaming influencers because they like to game and they can give them tips on how to game and to reach another level, for instance. And we see for all children that these influencers play an important role in the videos that they select. They really like this content. Not only the peer influencers, so the kidfluencers I was referring to, take an important role. So they are watching other children. They really like to watch them. Different types of videos, so pretend play, but also vlogs, so day in a lives videos, for instance. But also adult influencers. These adult influencers that are really publishing child-centered videos. So they are really very funny, entertaining videos, and children like to watch them. And when we were talking to these children about the videos, you see that they are so positive, that these influencers evoke so many positive emotions. They really like to talk about them. They showed it to us. They really liked that we were interested in what they were watching. They also asked it to their parents because we also interviewed the parents, and parents also say that the children also reach out to them to talk about the influencers. Some have music, songs, and the children were able to sing along with these songs that they saw. So for children, YouTube is a very pleasant environment. They consider it as a favorite pastime. They really enjoy it. They perceive it as informative and inspirational. They get tips for crafting, as I said. And for parents, it was also positive because they perceive it as an easy babysitter, they admitted, because they know that children are behaving very well when they are watching YouTube. They are quiet, they are not fighting with their brothers or sisters, and they sometimes use it as a reward. Some parents were told, yeah, my child doesn't want to join me to an activity, and if I say that the child can watch YouTube in the car while going to the activity, the child was more willing to join. However, there were also some concerns, of course. The children mentioned two main concerns, and the one concern was about the scary videos that they came across. Almost all children mentioned that they saw videos that frightened them. And remarkably, some children said that they just continued to watch and it just gave them scary feelings, but they just continued to watch. Others said that they stopped the video and selected another one, but none indicated that they went to their parents to talk about it. And also, some children mentioned that they had difficulties to consider what is real and not real. And this was also a concern among the parents, that they had the feeling, especially the preschooler children, so the very young ones, age 3 to 5, really believed what they saw on YouTube. Even the older ones, sometimes they are really convinced that what they saw, what the YouTuber told them was true. Even when the teacher told otherwise, they are not willing to believe the teacher, they are rather willing to believe the YouTuber. So parents had some difficulties with that. And next to that, parents also mentioned addictive design, that they find it very difficult to convince their children to stop watching YouTube. They mostly set some time limits, but children were very creative. There was a timer, and the children then paused the timer when their parents were not watching, in the hope that they would not see that they are watching longer. And parents also had some concerns about the content that the children were watching, and they were in need of more guidelines on what content can be good for children, what content is relaxing, and what content can give children a bad feeling, the scary content, for instance, but also other content that is too stimulating, that they see that their children react negatively on it. YouTube Kids can be a solution, but most of the parents mentioned that the content that is on there is too strict, too limited, and that their children indicated that they wanted to see other content as well, and that that's the reason why they didn't use YouTube Kids anymore, but the regular platform. So that was my first thoughts. Thank you.
That is absolutely fascinating, and we will come back to some of your findings because we can see already exactly the topic of our webinar that it's a combination of factors, right? So children on social media are going to pursue different things, but they all come together, and I think that also maybe from a regulatory perspective, we need to discuss them all together and also see how we can do better in practice. But thank you very much, Lieselot. Joasha, what are your thoughts just listening to this already and also based on your own research?
Yeah, thank you, Catalina. So I did want to talk about three regulatory issues that come to mind. So first, law and regulation are still playing a losing game of catch up, I think, in this area. So we underestimated the power and influence of service providers for decades. We allowed the service market to regulate itself. We focused in Europe on the freedom to provide services over the protection of consumers. And that was true long before the shift from ownership to the sharing economy, long before social media came to dominate the online landscape. Um, I think we also need to move away from treating minors as a subcategory of vulnerable consumers. They should be protagonists of their own regulatory framework. At the same time, we need solutions beyond simply making social media a forbidden fruit. That approach is familiar. We know how it ends. And with responsibility effectively shifted onto children, their parents, it just avoids liability rather than prevents harm. So I would also add that within the consumer protection framework, we tend not to regulate non-material issues or non-material harms, and influencer marketing often shapes emotions, triggers emotionally driven decision making. So this regulatory blind spot leaves all of us, and especially children, exposed to a far wider range of potential harms than traditional consumer law is designed to address, such as the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. So within this first point, we already see a threefold problem: the underregulation of services, the difficulty of treating children as merely another category of consumers, and a persistent gap in addressing non-material harms. Yes, we now have the Digital Services Act. The Digital Fairness Act is on the horizon in the EU, but at least with respect to the DSA, the types of harms we are discussing today, its capacity for meaningful mitigation remains quite limited. And this leads directly to my second point. So the second issue from regulatory perspective is that the consumer protection framework still depends heavily on the information paradigm and the idea that transparency and reducing information asymmetry will enable people to make reasonable and responsible choices. And I've done a lot of research on this topic, and I am more and more convinced that this is an increasingly outdated regulatory solution, especially in this area. So we have now Article 25 of the DSA, which introduces the responsible design principles, but these only go so far without robust content moderation. Algorithms amplify the visibility of content. They do not, at least yet, create or verify it. And the other DSA mechanisms that could, in theory, help address harmful social media content, such as notice and action procedures, clear advertising labels, transparency reporting, these all rely also on users being both able and willing to act on them. And we heard from Lieselot that, you see a scary video and you don't really react, you don't talk to anyone about this, right? So when we talk about the youngest users of social media, we can't realistically expect children to report harmful, illegal content. They won't know how to use reporting tools. They won't know, I think, also fundamentally how to recognize this harmful content in the first place. And I definitely think they won't understand a small advertising hashtag or a label attached to a social media post. So in this context, the information paradigm simply is not a reasonable or proportionate approach, and it leads to questions about the proportionality also of an approach that relies on influencers to do more than disclose paid partnerships. And by do more, I mean placing due diligence obligations on influencers to ensure reliability of content they present. If social media platforms, who are way more powerful, are not under a specific obligation to monitor content directly and content directed at children, should we expect influencers or all the family members to take on that responsibility? And speaking of family members, do they even know what content children are encountering online? So that's something that I would be also keen to know more about from Lieselot. From my own experience, I first accessed the internet as a teenager before social media existed. But even then, I navigated the digital environment far more easily than my parents did, and probably found content I was not meant to see at that age. And I now see the same gap with my students. I'm often out of touch with emerging platforms and trends. And that generational disconnect seems bound to repeat itself. So, if we stop thinking of of child protection of children simply as a subset of consumers and subset of consumer protection, and instead design protection from the ground up, I think we may find regulatory solutions that fit far better here. Which leads me to my third point, and very shortly, I think the breadth of knowledge required to understand what is happening online, especially on rapidly evolving social media platforms, exceeds the expertise of any single individual or any one discipline. No one person can keep up. We need more interdisciplinary collaboration. We must actively engage stakeholders themselves, particularly children and influencers. Otherwise, we risk continuing to misfire with regulatory solutions. And we recently saw in the UK the age verification requirements for accessing websites with pornographic content. Well, the main outcome was not better protection, but simply a surge in the use of VPN software, right? So I would finish here for now and happy to continue.
Thank you so much, Rasha. So, knowing also that you have dedicated a very, very large part of your research to information duties and transparency, and this is what you see from an academic perspective, now I would like to move to Otto because Otto is the director of the Stichting Reclamecode, and I should also have a disclosure here that I'm a very proud member of the Commission for the Advertising Code in the Netherlands. I have seen also the importance of transparency in practice and also how quite a lot of influencers and a lot of brands really collaborate and cooperate when they see that they are in an ecosystem that also listens to their needs. So, Otto, what is your perspective? Does transparency not work at all, or do you have maybe some good news for us?
Well, the first two speakers really paint a picture of a big distrust and there's a lot of things going wrong. I mean, that's basically what I hear. And I think the biggest currency for the industry is trust. The big brands and the brands that want to communicate to younger audiences, they need to build on trust and they want to be in an environment where they feel that their brand is safe. So they want to be with those influencers that work alongside the rules and have a good idea of what is good and what is bad. So I think industry is really looking in ways to get a grip on online advertising and also looking in ways to make it more professional and raise the standards, basically. So there's the law, and then there's the industry trying to make its own rules and make those rules as practical as possible and work with whatever new technological frontier is taken and we're going into new things in new platforms. And I fully agree with Joshua saying that there's a disconnect intergenerationally. We don't know what our children are currently seeing. And so is the industry constantly rejuvenating itself. If you look at the number of agencies that spring up in the whole social media world, it's amazing. That landscape is constantly transforming, and you see younger advisors giving lessons to old brands, basically how to behave and how to do things. And what we try to do with the self-regulatory institutes is just basically getting more grip on online advertising and see whether it is still abides with the rules that we need. Because those rules, they really work for trust. And trust is the thing that I think we can all unite on. We want our children to see things that are trustworthy. We don't want to be with Andrew Tate all the time. We want to be with brands that make good sense and have fun, do the right thing. That's what we want. So what we did in the Netherlands, and we are currently exporting that across a number of countries, is two things. We started monitoring influencers very keenly because we saw this was the lowest trusted marketing tool used by advertisers. So if you look at all the media that are used in the marketing plans, influencers are definitely on the bottom of the list in terms of trust. So we need to do something about that and apply rules there, have a code. We have a code since 2014, and that code has been rejigged and renewed over time, and currently we're still working on again a new version of it. That happens. Second thing is we started monitoring. So we really tried to find technological ways of, looking at an immense amount of content, thousands of posts a day, and to see whether we could monitor those and see whether we could find ways to get into that content and really push for the good parts and pick out the bad stuff. So monitoring is one of the big things. And the other thing that we started a couple of years ago and was really started in France by ARPP, the self-regulatory organization in France, is to a certification process and teach with e-learnings, teach the community of influencers to abide by the rules, know what the rules are, see what's going on, and effectively have influencers teach other influencers. So it's not me as a boomer saying you have to do things differently, but it was really a course made for I have to stop my phone from ringing, sorry. So we made a course, an online course to certify and to make a whitelist, basically a long list for advertisers to work with those influencers that are actually certified. And those certified influencers are again monitored very keenly whether they abide by the rules. So this is an initiative that we took in the Netherlands, in France, and it's now spilling over to all other European countries. We're very happy to say that there's now 11 countries offering this to the influencer community, and it really raises the standard within that community. So do we do everything right? No, but is there a good initiative there? Yes, there is. I mean, I think the industry is really taking up its responsibility. It's trying to work with everybody in that whole sphere. On the other side, to youngsters and children, the food industry, for instance, in Netherlands just adopted a new code which forbids any advertising on foods under the 13-year-old bracket. So there's no advertising there, and between 13 and 16-year-olds, it's a very limited list of foods that can be advertised. So there's reason to believe that also the industry is taking its responsibility there, and we can show that. Same for the alcohol industry, and there's other industries that are currently working on new codes as well. So let me leave it at that. I'm happy to debate this.
Thank you so very much, Otto. So basically what you're saying is that you have taken a very agile position in trying to really react early on to the development of this industry. We have been referring to the influencer industry, which has been mostly focused on advertising, but we now have this transition also into the content creator economy, which is currently estimated at around $250 billion worldwide. It is a huge economy that also includes, for instance, you were mentioning Andrew Tate, but the provision of digital services and digital content, courses, and anything that can be monetized on social media. So this agility, I think, is something that Yoasha was mentioning, that perhaps with more traditional legal frameworks, that's lacking. With us, we also have a very agile regulator that has been doing public enforcement, and that is the Norwegian Consumer Authority. So Erica, what kind of stories do you have for us in terms of what you have seen in practice and how your reaction has been in terms of implementing the very rules that Yoasha was referring to, such as the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive that is in your purview?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, and thank you for the invitation for participating. For us, I just from an enforcement perspective, I just want to give you guys a number, and it's 1,300, and that's the number of advertisement UNICEF reports a 14-year-old sees every single day on social media alone. And it's a huge number. And marketing directed to children is and continues to be an important topic for consumer authorities across Europe, both for us in Norway and within the member states of the Consumer Protection Network. What we do is that we are increasingly involved in cases and projects addressing the risks children faces online. particularly when it comes to unfair commercial practices from influencers and other traders operating on online platforms, which are not designed with the children's vulnerability in mind. So what I see both personally in my through my work is that the industry has evolved from simple online blogs into highly commercialized ecosystems that have very sophisticated business models that influence all consumers, not only children, and that encourages patterns that can resemble addictive behavior. So for us as consumer authorities, we are very much looking into the parasocial relationship influencers build with the young audience. That kind of relationship is where the child feels a very close, trust-based connection with someone they don't really know. And we know that this kind of persuasive power that the influencer marketing has is far stronger than the traditional advertising we have been used to. And hidden advertising by influencers undermines the children's ability to recognize commercial content and expose them to content to marketing that they really cannot understand. And we know that from research that children especially struggles to distinguish commercial content from ordinary content, and even when they see advertisement, they cannot often critically assess it. So because of this, we and other consumer authorities work to protect children from this type of unfair commercial practices in the influencer sector, a sector where we see it's a big diversity, where some actors really try to comply with the legal rules, and others where that we see consistently fail to meet the basic disclosure requirements. And in terms of the enforcement, we are very glad that we have a flexible legal framework, such as the Unfair Commercial Practice Directive that was mentioned. And at the same time, we know as authorities that some parts of this framework may need some evolve to keep in line with the rapid digital developments that we have. So, like Barry mentioned in the opening statement, is that we have the Digital Fairness Act that is being discussed at the European level that is giving some proposals specifically concerning influencer marketing. So that will be something for us to really keep in mind and looking into during like the discussions that are coming from there. But I just want to also say that many consumer authorities, including us in Norway, we have developed guidelines to help the influencer industry to better understand the legal requirements that we have already and how to disclose advertising on platforms. But we have also created an educational tool for children, the advertising school, because we know that the consumers also need to learn about the commercial practices, such as influencer marketing and how it affects them. And also through the CPC network, we have tried to assist traders such as influencers and businesses with key principles, and we have also tried to contribute to some of the content on the Influencer Legal Hub, because we see the need for more guidelines for the industry. So I just want to emphasize for everybody listening in that if you're an influencer, an agency, or a business, and you're unsure about the legal rules, I would say that most consumer authorities are very much wanting to give you guidance on how to understand the legal rules, because we want to work with you guys for it to be more easier for you to comply with the legal rules. And to help create a safer environment for children online. So yeah, some thoughts.
Thank you so very much. That's a lot of very interesting points. And we will have, I think, around 51 minutes to engage in a debate, as Otto called it. And also, I would like to welcome any of the participants to leave their questions in the chat so that we can also build on your concerns and also on the points that you would like to make. If you have any other very important information to share, please let us know in the chat and we're going to bring it in our discussion. But I really liked, Erica, how you were explaining it towards the end of your opening statement. You know, we want to work with influencers. This is also what we heard from Otto. This is also something that really was reflected, a need, an inherent need that was reflected in Joasha's contribution. And now going back to Lieselot, because your project actually takes this angle, which is so essential. We see that digitalization is really changing the world. So it's perhaps very attractive to have the narrative of, the digital world is ruining the lives of our children. But that's not really a full picture, right? So there are positive things and that there are negative things. And then, of course, there's regulation that can only do so much. So it's important that brands and content creators themselves work together because it will take a village to teach our children how to become consumers in a digital world. But Lieselot, your project focuses very much on this concept of consumer socialization. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and then how are children learning today to be consumers in this crazy digital world that we're all a part of?
Children grow as consumers throughout childhood. They learn different things. They need to learn what are brands, what are products, characteristics of products, what is the value of money, pricing strategies, online shopping, how does shopping work, what are the tricks to manipulate me, to convince me to buy certain stuff, how can I evaluate products and take the best decision. And this knowledge and skills is needed to make smart consumption decisions. Now, the focal point lies in childhood, but of course, consumer socialization is a lifelong process. Think of all the phishing attempts now. You need to learn and adapt all the time as a consumer because the world is changing so fast. And children learn from experiences they have with products, brands. They sometimes join their parents to the supermarket. They can choose for toys. And these experiences bring in new knowledge and skills. But they also learn from socialization agents. Parents, of course, are a very important agent. They teach children a lot of things about consumption from a very early age on. But also schools, teachers, peers, especially for the teenagers. Peers become much more important than parents as socialization agents. They tell each other about the products, brands they are using. They tell them about their experiences. And we also see media occurring as a socialization agent. In the literature, it's often considered as a negative agent because it's a highly commercialized environment. Advertising is on there, so it's more disempowering than an empowering experience. And we are now doing research on how social media acts as a socialization agent. And in particular, we focused on TikTok and teenagers between 11 and 16 years old. So they already have some knowledge, but they are now becoming more sophisticated. They are having more abstract thinking. Other things come into play, like the social motives, the social interactive, symbolic value of products are becoming more important. So we want to know how TikTok can act as a learning environment for this consumer knowledge for teenagers. And we did some interviews with them, and then we noticed that they learn a lot of new things about products, brands, what is trendy, what is hip and cool in my peer group, but also about how to make smarter purchase behaviors. Where can I find promotions? What are cheaper alternatives for luxury goods, for instance? What are the good retailers that I can use to buy things online? And also about advertising literacy. They know a lot already about what the commercial environment is of TikTok. They are also very critical about content that comes from brands, all the sponsored content, the advertisements they see, and also the sponsored content from influencers. They are also highly skeptical towards that. They are most open to the consumption content that is published by their peer group, which is not sponsored then. They are critical, so they are not just accepting this knowledge, but they are really checking the trustworthiness of the sources. They are combining and comparing different videos. They read the comment sections, and they also discuss it with their friends about the new products that they saw. So they are quite skeptical when they are watching that content. But they really like this environment as a source of information and inspiration. It's a very easy and quick information tool. They like to use the search bar and search function in TikTok to search for travel trips, for instance, or new fashion or skincare routines. It's problem solving. It helps them with practical tips on how to solve problems. And it's a source of inspiration and validation. They know what is accepted and what is the norm in their peer group. And we also noticed in our study that they bring this knowledge to the parents as well, because parents are not as that digital savvy. They are also not often on TikTok as the platform. So we see that teenagers transfer the knowledge to parents, but at the same time that parents are quite skeptical. And this often leads to shared learning where parents and children bring their own knowledge together and actively search for new knowledge to gain more knowledge about this particular product or retailers. And we are now doing similar research, so in Kidfluencer among the children and the preschool children, because their knowledge is fully different. They are also cognitively and emotionally developing. Preschoolers are really developing a theory of mind, which is necessary to be able to know when you are manipulated. And I already noticed that the preschoolers have a lot of difficulties to understand advertising. They know the pre-roll ads, they know that they have to skip them because it interrupts their video experience, but they don't know the concept of advertising, and they definitely do not understand ads that are integrated in the videos. Even if it's disclosed, it's very difficult for them. They don't know the concept yet. It already starts with the younger children aged 8 to 12. They are a bit critical. They are very negative towards advertising, but because it interrupts their experience and they do not like feeling being manipulated. But you see a lot of differences in the different age groups. So I think it's very important to be very specific when developing rules and guidelines to make sure what audience is addressed, to make sure that the guidelines are in line with the age and what children are able to understand and to do.
And what it was, that is again fascinating. So, what would your perception be on the basis of what you have seen in your research? Where does it become difficult to draw a line? Because I think that you're saying preschoolers, right? So, there can be a very, very big difference between a preschooler and a 17-year-old. But where do these groups become so close by and that the features can be so difficult to identify that it would be very difficult to draw a line and say, okay, regulation should kick in from this age onwards?
Yeah, I think for the preschoolers, there should be very strict guidelines. Yeah, of course, preschoolers should not be on YouTube, maybe, but they are on YouTube. So I think it's very important to take the important steps to protect them better. But also for the teenagers, I think transparency there for them is very important. Be very clear on what the commercial deals are. They can then more easily detect the advertising, but sometimes it's not easy. In YouTube videos, there are a lot of brands integrated, and if it's just mentioned in the beginning that the video contains sponsored content, yeah, what kind of deal is there? What is exactly sponsored? What is not? So it's not easy. So the more specific it is, the better, I guess.
And thank you so very much. Going on this, on what Lieselot, you were mentioning about, for instance, the fact that children see a lot of ads, but also the ads that they do like or ads that influence them in a positive way. What happens when these ads or whenever there is content that brings about the concern that Lieselot was mentioning earlier, the idea of what exactly is real and perhaps some children not being able to identify that? Erica, do you have some insights for us from Norway when it it comes to how this rule on the disclosure of filtered and manipulated images has played out in practice, because this has been also one of the topics that really has crossed into not only the discussion of influencers, but also the idea of social media addiction because of the mental health pressure and the mental health impact that some, for instance, self-image issues can have, particularly on adolescent girls, if my recollection of the research is correct. What are your insights from Norway?
Well, just to explain for you guys a little bit about this national rule. So it's only applicable in Norway and not in the rest of Europe, but it came into force back in 2022. And the rule is focused mostly on, or it's focused on digital retouching and other manipulation forms, where the person in the advertisement, the body shape, size, or skin has been changed, regardless if it's beautification or not. So in practice, that means that if an influencer uses a beauty filter that reshapes the face or smooths the skin, and this is used in advertising content, then the video and the image has to be clearly labeled with the standardized label. And the purpose of that rule was, as you said, to combat the unrealistic and manipulated appearance standards that we see in the advertisement sector. And it's not only girls, it's all genders, I would say. And it's not only, yes, the thought was to protect children in particular, but it is to protect all consumers. But a challenge that we see is that the rule came just when the beginning of AI content started to emerge. So unluckily, the rule doesn't really tackle that problem. So that's something that we are looking in, or the Norwegian government is aware of and looking into. But what we have seen is that mostly the bigger businesses has used the label, and the influencers they like, from what we have heard from them is that, yeah, but we don't use that kind of filters and beautifications when we are promoting brands, but we know that. But so we haven't had that much focus on enforcing it. We have mostly, since it's a very new and innovative legal rule, we have mostly given guidance to brands and influencers and agencies on that topic.
Thank you so very, very much. So we're hearing about a lot of different rules that can be implemented, but also a lot of risks. And Yoasha, I wanted to ask you in particular, and maybe we can also take into account what we see already, a question in the chat. How exactly should we regulate a field like this that has so many different risks, that already is suffering maybe from this information asymmetry that you were mentioning, particularly vis-a-vis very large platforms? And should we go into such granular detail with the law, such as, saying, okay, children should not be exposed to more than X amount of ads per day, as we see here in the chat being asked?
This is a fantastic question that's impossible to answer, Catalina. How would we enforce it? And I'm sure Erika would agree, right? Like, let's say children should not see more than 100 ads. That sounds like a lot, right? Let's say 10 ads a day. How do we check it? Do we, let's say we put an obligation on platforms to ensure it, right? That a certain amount of advertising content is shown. So firstly, the platform would have to recognize what's advertising content. And a lot of advertising content now is native advertising. And I think anyone would have difficulty, not just children, spotting it, whether it's actually advertising. So there would be an issue there. The second issue would be, let's say a child switches from platform to platform. The platform is supposed to share the amount of advertising content that a particular individual was already exposed to. And how would they do that? Because that would require also transfer and communication on a lot of personal data, right? Because you would pretty much have to track the child activities online. And we are actually trying to minimize the use of personal data, especially for children. Data and personalizing provision of services to them is actually something that is more prohibited than personalizing of services to our users. So I think from a regulatory perspective, but also practical perspective, enforcers perspective, it's very difficult to think of such a solution. So then what comes to mind? Total ban on the use of services, right? Because that would potentially solve the problems, but it doesn't solve the problems. It's a really good example of, I think, overregulation and not taking into account, again, the practicalities. And the practicalities are that children are more tech savvy than their parents, so they can very easily go around any bans of access. Plus, what Lielot mentioned at the very beginning, some parents also see social media or internet as a good example of a babysitter, right? Which means they will give that access to a child because that will keep them quiet and that will keep them engaged. And and also potentially, hopefully, facilitate some knowledge learning and some beneficial things provide them. So altogether, I think from a regulatory perspective, this is a very difficult issue. And I was also thinking when Erika was talking about that example of filters, that even if you manage to enforce, even if you manage to see, okay, so this influencer is using filters, this brand is using filters, they should put that disclosure on about the use of filters. At one point do we reach disclosure fatigue, right? So if we see a bunch of these messages, a bunch of the same labels being placed over and over again, you stop paying attention to them, and the impact, I think, behaviorally will be as if that label wasn't there. And again, if we talk about very young users of social media, they are likely also not going to notice that label. Some of them won't be able to read it yet, right? They will be watching the video, but they won't be at a stage where they will be reading small print or any print. A lot of issues, I think, from a regulatory perspective here that are unfortunately not easy to solve. And I think require more our rethinking of what we consider as socially acceptable at the moment, and how do we want to raise our children, how we communicate with them, rather than what do we ban, what do we regulate, and to what extent.
That's those are again, I think, ongoing questions. And also just looking at the chat, maybe Otto, and then building on what Joasha was mentioning about not only disclosure fatigue, but also over-regulation. Looking at the vast number of codes, the special codes, and the advertising code of the Netherlands and your organization, looking also at the law, is it not that we just have a lot of laws, but we have an enforcement problem? And for instance, is your monitoring activity a solution to that? Just an innovative, technology-driven way to say, we do have the rules that we need. Let's just see what we do with them in practice first, and then we can maybe fine-tune what additional regulation we might need. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. Enforcement definitely is a big problem. I don't think there's many institutions that really can enforce these rules correctly and timely. I also think that we need to have a basic understanding of what we think is right. We don't want children overexposed to bad content. But what is bad? 1,300 brands or 1,300 advertising elements. Yes, it sounds like an awful lot, but I think people filter stuff out. You get constantly bombarded when you walk the street or the high street from a major city. You're bombarded with brands. So this is something that we have to get used to and make our children get used to, that they ban out or they just don't react on everything they see. And I know this is something that it has to do with good parenting, has to do with schooling, it has to do with how we think our children are raised in a normal way. And that changes over generations. I mean, I raised my children a certain way, but they are now so old they've kind of found their way in how to work with all these impulses that they get. But yeah, if you look at if what we do with monitoring, it's basically looking at all kinds of ways of disclosure. For instance, we look whether there's the correct use of hashtag ad or hashtag partnership or other hashtags that disclose advertising content. That's very specific. I don't think that will guide everything, and it will not help the bad actors to stop what they're doing. So it's a way of us trying to educate the community and educate the vast majority of influencers that we work with. I mean, we've now certified more than 2,000 influencers in the Netherlands. There must be a much larger community of maybe 20,000 or even more influencers that work in the Dutch language. We're trying to reach out to them. We're trying to get a grip on them as well. But it's a moving target, and there's new influencers starting up every day, and there's influencers dying every day, so to say. They stop just doing what they were doing because they found something else or they do something differently. So it's very hard to put your finger on what is that community and how they talk. So we need to talk to them constantly. We try to interact with them, but they don't have a union. They don't have a certain face that we can talk to and say, now we talk to the full influencer community. So to us, the way in is through the advertisers, and basically the people that want to make the commercial deal with influencers. They are a limited number that we can talk to and that we respond to very quickly and say, if you're a big company like Unilever or Mars or McDonald's, you should abide by the rules. You have a reason to stay on the right side of the track. You don't want to pass into murky stuff. And I think that is basically what we're trying to do with the advertising community. Does it work for a full 100%? No, but at least it's a way in.
Thank you so very much. And also you have been also monitoring that. And I believe at some point I also saw some results of that monitoring, and you did see an improvement in the disclosure rates, and you saw that the industry is actually reacting to some education. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean we follow the influencers that actually have done the certification and have taken notice of the rules, and we follow them very keenly. We monitor them, and we see that there's almost a 100% compliance. I mean, you're not fully 100%, but they are compliant to the rules. And if we find somebody who's not playing by the rules, and we address that, they take down their posts. So we are very happy with that part. But again, I mean, we're not talking about real bad actors, people that want to do harm. They're there and they're not going to follow us at all. So there needs to be something of a law as well to enforce on some parts of the internet, I'm sure. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Co-regulation. Yeah.
Regulation. Yoash, I see you nodding. So you agree with these points, and perhaps also would you like to reflect on one of the other questions that we got in the chat? Where does the impact of regulation actually end, and where do you really need to rely on other factors? And doesn't regulation actually need to entail, for instance, what we have seen with the AI Act, such as an AI literacy obligation on certain actors? Because here we're talking, and Otto was mentioning this as well, we're talking about education. Erica mentioned that this is also very relevant. You're a legal expert, you know the entire European Union Consumer Protection Acquis, and it's still difficult to understand. So how will an influencer with 20,000 followers be able to really gauge that at the same time and also implement it in practice?
Well, I think the Influencer Legal Hub is a very good start, right? Because it tries to break down really complex questions and issues into biteable and digestible pieces. So I think that's a really good start there. But and I think education and ethical approach and understanding that we are expecting certain ethical standards, what we under Unfair Commercial Practices Directive technically would call professional diligence standards, right? So we do expect that, and from that perspective, what Stichting Reclamecode is doing and other advertising regulators is fantastic, and I think that was one of the first things that we saw actually having any impact in that field. I do think there was a question in the chat, what is the bigger challenge, legislation or enforcement? I think enforcement is definitely tricky, and I'm sure Erika can address it more, but I do find there are still gaps in the legislation that could be addressed. So, I previously was saying that law cannot solve all of this, but it can help further. And I do find, as I've mentioned previously, that the whole idea that we only employ consumer protection framework when there are material harms involved. That's a huge issue currently. Another issue is that we consider children as just a category of young consumers. We think that they have the same biases, same needs, same experiences as adults. Maybe they are more naive, maybe they are more vulnerable, but still the framework is the same. And that could be reconsidered. We could have more specific prohibition of practices. So currently, the prohibition in the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive is still based on the 2005 pretty much worldview. That could be adjusted, and that's what we expect in Digital Fairness Act to address. To what extent Digital Fairness Act would try to level the playing field further, that's the big question that we are all waiting with bated breath kind of right now to see what's going to happen. So there was another question in the chat about evidence supporting a ban on children's use of social media. Well, yes, you can find such evidence, but you can also find evidence that it's not working. So from all the literature that I've read on the topic, the opinions are very much divided as to the effectiveness, efficiency of such an approach. And we've seen also when this was introduced in Australia that teenagers themselves were protesting and saying that indeed their rights are being infringed. So this is, in my opinion, still an example of overregulation, and that there is not a sufficient evidence that this is an effective and proportionate regulatory response to the risks that we are encountering and that children are encountering. Yeah, so that would be, I think, my contribution here, Catalina.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other opinions on this? Otto, Lieselot, Erika, what do you think about the social media ban? Lieselot?
Yes, I'm maybe also responding to a comment in the chat if we should inform parents better about the importance of mediation and that it's important to limit the hours. But from my experience, even the parents who know that it's important to mediate experience difficulties because the social media are so appealing to young children. And I think also society and the demands that now lay on parents, you often have to work. There is not much free time. Children's environments are often smaller. There is not a lot of playgrounds outside. So I think we should also change the system more that provide